following is a special presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network. From Yellowstone Public Radio and MTN News, this is Montana Senate Debate. Now, here's your moderator, Jay Cone.
And welcome to tonight's U.S. Senate Debate here on the Montana Television Network. We thank you for joining us. You know, this upcoming midterm election is now just a little more than 3 weeks away, 24 days if you're counting at home. In fact, the absentee ballots were mailed out on Friday of this week, and in many cases, the early voting has already begun. Now, as this Senate race enters its home stretch, tonight we have the opportunity to see the candidates face off face-to-face in yet another debate, but the final televised debate prior to Election Day. Before we get started tonight, we want to pass on just one sad note. We want to pay tribute to a member of the MTN family who passed away this week. Longtime KXLF General Manager Ron Cass died Thursday at the age of 74. Our thoughts and prayers are with Ron's wife Nancy and his family. You know, Ron loved to talk politics and the issues of the day, and I know that he's watching down on us on this broadcast tonight. Ron Cass was a great man and will be greatly missed. And now on to tonight's debate. Let's meet the candidates. Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Tester is an organic farmer from Big Sandy in north central Montana. He has worked as a music teacher, ran a custom butcher shop, and served on the Big Sandy School Board. He served 2 terms as a state senator and finished his final term as president of the Montana Senate. Tester first ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006, defeating Republican Conrad Burns, and was re-elected in 2012. He and his wife Charla have 2 biological children and another who they consider to be part of their family. They have 5 grandchildren. Republican candidate Matt Rosendale from Glendive in eastern Montana currently serves as Montana's state auditor and insurance commissioner. Rosendale has worked as a real estate broker and developer and has lived in Montana for 16 years on a ranch that his family purchased along the Yellowstone River north of Glendive. He served 6 years in the legislature, including a session as Senate Majority Leader. He also ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. House in 2014. He and his wife Jean have 3 sons. Libertarian Rick Breckenridge is a land surveyor from Proctor near the west shore of Flathead Lake. Breckenridge grew up in southern Oregon and has lived in Montana for most of the last 35 years. He helped develop the state's cadastral mapping project, an electronic visual database of all listed property in the state. Breckenridge also is a veteran of the U.S. Army, serving as an infantry officer. He is assistant treasurer of the Montana Libertarian Party and first ran for office in 2016 for the U.S. House. He and his wife Tracy Ray have 2 sons. As we get ready to begin the questioning tonight, I just want to run down a few of the debate rules for our viewers. Now, the order of the questioners was decided earlier by random. The candidate who has asked the question gets 1 minute to respond. The other 2 candidates then have a 30-second rebuttal time, and the initial candidate gets a 30-second response to complete the question. And as moderator, we'll also perhaps have some follow-up questions which we will allow. Tonight's debate, we need to tell you, also broadcasting over the services of Yellowstone Public Radio, and this will also be available on all the MTN websites. Let's meet our panel of journalists to ask the question of the candidates. Tim McGonigal is anchor producer at KRTV Great Falls, KXLH Helena. Jackie Yamanaka, senior political correspondent with Yellowstone Public Radio. And Kevin Stanfield is news director and anchor at KBZK Bozeman, KXLF Butte. I'm Jay Cone, your moderator, anchor, and reporter at KTVQ Billings. With that, our first question tonight goes to Mr. Breckenridge from Kevin Stanfield. Kevin.
First of all, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We know you have a busy schedule, so we really appreciate this.
Thank you.
First question then. What would you say is your proudest political moment? Could you describe that for us?
Proudest political moment, I think, was when we started the cadastral mapping project. I was told that it could never happen. You couldn't make it happen. But we got 5 counties together and formed a coalition that was to be mutually benefit for every citizen in the state of Montana. Convincing the state now was another problem because you had all the power turfs that you had to contend with. Department of Revenue. They had their ideas, Department of Transportation. But we got everybody on the same sheet of music, and we got an accomplishment that no other state has ever done. And this system is probably the best example of cooperation. And when you put politics aside, and you cooperate for the mutual benefit of everybody, that you can accomplish monumental things.
Mr. Rosendale.
That's pretty easy. Gun rights are critically important to the vast majority of the people here in Montana, and I'm really, really proud that I've been endorsed by the NRA. The NRA stayed out of these elections the last several cycles, and to receive a rating from the NRA, to receive their endorsement against a two-term sitting senator who can only muster up a D grade from the NRA, I'm very proud of that.
Senator Tester, your proudest moment.
Well, you know, Jay, first of all, I want to thank MTN, and I want to thank you guys for putting this on. I appreciate it very much. I served on soil conservation, to school board, to the state legislature, and one thing Montana has that I don't think any other state has, and that's an open government. And I've been proud to take that back, and the first bill I dropped in the U.S. Senate was a bill to make the federal government as open as Montana's government. I think it's critically important, not only for the press to be able to get access to the decisions that are being made that are going to affect our country, but for the general population too.
Mr. Breckenridge, you've had the final word.
I would say this, that you know, libertarians have never sent your sons and daughters to war. Libertarians have never invoked a tax upon you that was too onerous. And libertarians seek mutual cooperation for the benefit of all. And whatever you ask government to do for you, don't ever forget that they have the power to do an equivalent force to you. So don't ever forget that. And libertarians haven't.
Jackie Yamanaka has our next question, directed to Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Rosendale, you support short-term insurance plans that aren't required to cover pre-existing conditions. So if they're so great, will you pledge today that you will buy one to cover your family?
Jackie, that's a good question, and I think it goes directly to the heart of all the insurance questions that we've had here over the last 8 years since the passage of Obamacare, which we cannot forget that Jon Tester was the deciding vote on and brought it to us. And what we saw with Obamacare was the elimination of choice for the people of Montana. We saw the increase of costs for health care for the people of Montana. And since I entered the auditor's office, my first step was to start working on a plan to cover pre-existing and chronic conditions for the people across our state. And that is critically important. But the next thing that we have to do is make sure that we have options for everyone so that they can accommodate their budgets, their specific health care needs, and their personal choices. So short-term plans are part of that. Direct primary care plans are part of that. Healthcare sharing ministries are part of that. And none of these things will accommodate everyone, but they certainly will, in their place, give everyone an opportunity.
I don't think you answered my question, Mr. Rosendale. I mean, you say you support these short-term insurance plans, and if they're so great, would you buy one today to cover your family?
What I'm saying, Jackie, is that we need to have a full range of options of health care plans for everyone to make a decision what is best for them. It is not a federally run, top-down system for the elitists to make a decision about what is best for you and what is not best for you. That's what I'm saying. It's up to the individual to make a decision about what type of plan that they want to use to accommodate their health care needs, and that's what I've been supporting.
Senator Tester, your response.
Thank you for the question, Jackie. I would just say that junk insurance plans are called junk for a reason, and it's why any responsible person would not buy a junk health insurance plan to support their family. That's why Matt wouldn't answer that question. The fact of the matter is they don't cover pre-existing conditions. They don't cover much. My folks had one of those such plans when I got these fingers cut off in a meat grinder, and they didn't cover anything. And I remember my father going, we bought this insurance to have it when we needed it, and when we needed it, it wasn't there. If you buy junk insurance, what the commissioner is promoting, you'll have nothing when you get sick, because it doesn't cover pre-existing conditions. It doesn't prevent for lifetime caps. If you got asthma, high blood pressure, whatever it might be, they won't cover. But they're cheap.
Mr. Breckenridge.
Well, I'm trying to sort out where in the Constitution there's 36 delegated powers, where insurance is one of those. the federal government is supposed to stick their nose into. Our business is to run the federal government, not to make sure everyone has health care. I'm in the VA system, and I'll tell you this, that before John Tester went and stirred the pot, I got an MRI, and it only took me 6 hours to get there and get the MRI and get it accomplished. After he went and made his changes, it took me 6 months now to get an MRI. So there are changes that need to be made, but you don't need to figure those out at a hearing in Washington, D.C. You got to sit and listen to that nurse who's pumping the blood pressure cuff and telling you where things need to be changed. That's how you make effective change. Pre-existing conditions are covered in the VA system. I don't even think when I worked at Flathead County that their self-insured program covered pre-existing conditions. So it's up to the individual employer insurer to select the right insurance plan for themselves.
All right. Matt Rosendale, you have the final word.
Sure. Once again, we see the elitist attitude of John talking about that he knows what's best for you and what isn't best for you. And this is what happens when you spend too much time in the federal government. He's been there for 12 years, and he thinks that he can determine what is best for you and what is best for your family. And I don't think so. I think it is up to us to make sure that you have as many opportunities to accommodate your health care needs in a way that understands your budget, your specific health care needs, and your personal choices, and not a top-down, federally run system.
Our next question comes from Tim McGonigal to Senator Tester. Tim.
Senator Tester, you voted against both of President Trump's Supreme Court nominees. So what qualities or qualifications are you looking for when considering a Supreme Court nominee?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, with Judge Kavanaugh, this nomination was botched up from the beginning, to be honest with you. It was far too politicized. We should not be politicizing the Supreme Court. But one of the problems that Judge Kavanaugh had was in a previous administration, he developed a mass surveillance plan that could be used on Montanans and any other state in the Union. As a judge, he backed up the Patriot Act, which I, quite frankly, think is the biggest impingement on our privacy of anything we've done. He also thinks that dark money and campaigns are fine. So, to your question, Tim, it needs to be somebody who understands the Constitution, that understands that the Fourth Amendment, which prevents the government from violating our privacy, is lived up to. Understand that dark money in these campaigns has an incredible problem with our democracy, and out-of-state folks who want to buy this election, and we're seeing plenty of it in behalf of Commissioner Rosendale, needs to be stopped if we're going to save this democracy.
Quick follow-up, Tim.
Yes, Senator. Democratic leadership has recently agreed to allowing candidates who are involved in closely contested races to return home to their states to campaign during election season and not oppose some federal judicial appointments. Isn't that considered hypocritical?
We had votes on all those yesterday or day before yesterday, as a matter of fact, and everybody had their opportunity to vote for or against those. It was not a deal that was cut in a back room and said, here, take it or leave it. You're taking all 50, and we voted on each and every one of them.
Mr. Breckenridge, you have 30 seconds.
I think if you look at the nomination process and confirmation process of Neil Gorsuch, you have a perfect example of when you bring a libertarian into the mix for confirmation, advise and consent from the Senate, advise and consent. This search and destroy mission that the Senate Democrats have been on is inexcusable, and we should recall, voters need to recall every one of them that participated in it, because this is a stain on our republic, not our democracy. We are a republic.
Mr. Rosendale.
I think that there was a tremendous disservice done to Dr. Ford, Judge Kavanaugh, and to the American public. We saw something play out that was unnecessary, could have been kept private to protect the privacy of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh, protect his family, but it wasn't. And John Tester knew 90 days ago that he was voting against Judge Kavanaugh. He wouldn't meet with him. He made it up that he was going to vote against him from the very beginning, and the shame of it is that he's voted for Obama's judges 100% of the time for the Supreme Court, and he's voted against President Trump's Supreme Court nominees 100% of the time. And there's the problem.
Time is up. Senator Tester, your final.
Let's be clear. I did the research on Judge Kavanaugh. I found out what his positions were as a judge and as a private citizen. Quite frankly, Commissioner Rosendale endorsed Kavanaugh the minute he was nominated. Did you do any research, Commissioner Rosendale, on it? I think not. Bottom line is, the record shows that I tried to meet with Judge Kavanaugh many, many times. It would have been great. It's the first one ever that hasn't met with me, by the way. And it would have been great to hear from his mouth my concerns about his violation of the Fourth Amendment. But he did not come to my office. We tried.
Our
We
next
couldn't make
question.
the meeting happen.
Next question comes from Jackie Yamanaka to Mr. Breckenridge.
Mr. Breckenridge, if you're a member of the U.S. Senate and you disagree with the President's actions as, say, they relate to Russia or North Korea, would you be willing to vote for sanctions or even possibly military action that may be counter to the President's agenda?
Military action is a very, very, being a veteran of 17, almost 18 years in the Army and leading infantry troops, that is a very serious order that has to be given. And when you push that button and you vote yes for it, you had better be absolutely 100% sure. The empire that we have to sustain has stretched this to the limits in the Middle East, and we have to take all that into consideration. Sanctions are a very, very severe form of getting someone's attention, and we had better be very certain of not only our intelligence, which I know in the military we've had bad intel before, and what we saw with the lead up to the invasion of Iraq and under Bush, that the bad intelligence has gotten us into a 15-year war. And so, Jackie, in answer to your question, it had better be very severe circumstances, and everything had better, all the I's better be dotted and the T's crossed before I cast a vote for yes.
Mr. Rosendale, you have a rebuttal time here.
The United States military should only be used in the case of imminent threat to our citizens and our interests at home or abroad. And we could broaden the scope of this discussion from North Korea and Russia and start talking about our southern border. That is one of the jobs of the federal government, is to make sure that we secure our borders. And Jon Tester has voted consistently with the likes of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi to give us open borders and sanctuary cities. Meanwhile, we've got a porous border that's allowing the flow of drugs and human trafficking to come in, and that's not acceptable.
Senator Tester.
Look, military force should be used in the absolutely last possible option. I think we use sanctions, and I've done it before, serving on a banking committee, working with our allies to make sure we bring these folks to the table and change their way they do business. As far as the southern border goes, I need to point out to Auditor Rosendale that the Customs and Border Protection folks, the folks who work on the ground, have endorsed me, not you. Why? Because they understand that I understand how important security is on the southern border. I give them what they need to be successful, and I think we need to do even more to make sure our border is secure.
Mr. Breckenridge, you have the last word on this question.
Well, we kind of got a long ways from the original question talking about the border, but let's talk about the border. That border is the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that it's secure. Not the states, not anybody else, but the federal government. And there is an invasion on there. Is the wall going to work? No. Wall's not going to work. We got to change the way people think and help them on that other side, and to bring them to the table and have them realize that staying home is far better than coming to the United States and getting thrown into our penal system.
Our next question, Tim McGonigal to Mr. Rosendale.
Mr. Rosendale, I want to talk about political ads. We've seen a lot of them in the past few weeks, but in this campaign we've seen Senator Tester referred to as a puppet for Democratic leadership, and even as an inventor of the media circus. You yourself have been referred to as Maryland Matt, all hat, no cattle. Why not focus on the issues rather than playground taunts? Aren't these ads just insulting the intelligence of Montanans?
They are, and I really appreciate that question, Tim, because I'll tell you something. When I entered this campaign a year ago, folks asked me what it was going to be about, and I said, it's going to be about the truth, and let's keep it focused on the issues. I was sent to Helena to reduce spending, to reduce regulations, to protect your property rights and your gun rights and the sanctity of life, and I did all those things. I reduced spending in the auditor's office. The operating costs were reduced by 23% the very first year I was in there. I declined my pay raise. and was the only elected state official to do so. And those are the kinds of things that people in Montana want to hear that we are actually doing. And so when we ask about what this campaign is going to be about, it's going to be about the truth. The truth is, John brought us Obamacare. The truth is, John doesn't support the president when he brought us tax cuts. The truth is that John has supported sanctuary cities and open border policies with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and I'm going to help the president to expand our economy and secure our nation.
Tim, quick follow-up.
Yes, Mr. Rosendale, I want to talk about one of those particular ads aimed at you in particular. It criticizes you for backing what's called a substandard real estate development in Great Falls. What's your response?
Boy, do I really appreciate you bringing that up. John Tester has raised so much money from lobbyists that he got caught taking a camera crew to Oklahoma to get somebody to profess some lies about a subdivision that I opened up in Great Falls.
Who lived in your subdivision and sold out and went to Oklahoma?
Let's let Mr. Rosendale finish.
Speaking of Montana values, I didn't think that we interrupted each other. Went to Oklahoma and got caught getting someone to tell lies about a project, and then the people who actually live there called up and said, take that down, it's a bunch of false information and some more Washington Democrat smears.
Now, Senator Tester, you can respond.
Well, the facts are the facts, and it's another attempt in his property development of Matt Rosendale avoiding the truth and taking responsibility for it. The facts are clear. The public record speaks for itself. But let's talk about the issues. Matt Rosendale wants to sell you public lands. He wants to kick people with pre-existing conditions off of health care. He wants to privatize your public schools, make them into charters and vouchers. He wants to make more dark money into our political system for these kind of lousy ads you're talking about, Tim. Fact of the matter is, I have supported public lands. I support public education. I support people being able to buy health insurance at a reasonable rate because it's too costly. And we'll continue to work to make sure our government is transparent. That's my record. That's why he can't run positive ads. He has to run negative.
Mr. Breckenridge, your final word.
Did anyone ever hear of a negative ad coming from a libertarian? No. These are ideological accelerants that they use to activate their base. All right, and so the angrier they can get them, the more fired up that they think that their base is going to come out and turn out to vote. So these are just accelerants. They're throwing gas on the flames of things that are half-truths. I mean, Matt has no responsibility for a contractor putting in a foundation. All right, you do the I'm a surveyor. I've done hundreds of developments, and no one ever blamed me for a foundation. So I think, John, you went over the line on that one.
Mr. Rosendale, you have the final word here for 30 seconds.
Again, the facts do speak for themselves, and John may not like the truth, but the truth is always the truth. And he had to hire a camera crew to go to Oklahoma to find someone to lie about a subdivision that, talk about public lands. Within that community, I donated 11 acres to the city of Great Falls so that they would have some open space for the children to go out there and play. And then I put a playground out there for them as well. So I'm very proud of the projects that I've opened up. And the folks that are living there, the ones that are actually there, they're proud of it as well. And that's why they called John up and they asked him to take that commercial down.
Our next question from Kevin Stanfield goes to Senator Tester.
Senator Tester, let's talk about the Second Amendment to the Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. Do you believe that Second Amendment right is absolute, without question?
First of all, I just want to say one thing in regard to the last question, because the record needs to be set straight. Commissioner Rosendale had the soil surveys. He knew it had to be done to build those right. He never told the contractor to do it right. That's where the problem is. The Second Amendment, look, I'm a strong supporter of it. I protect my farm with it. I protect my family with the Second Amendment rights we have given. In fact, when Matt Rosendale was building houses in Maryland, I was butchering beef and pork. Literally made my living with a gun. It's critically important. I will tell you that I've done things to allow guns in parks, to allow guns on trains, to expand our Second Amendment rights. I feel strongly in it. And nobody's going to take our guns away under my watch. On the other side of the coin, if you are a criminal, you need to have a background check because you forfeited that right. If you are court adjudicated mentally ill, you have forfeited that right. And so or if you're a terrorist, you have forfeited that right. So I think we need to have good, honest background checks. But when we pass a gun from father to son or friend to friend, there shouldn't be background checks required. The liability is obvious there.
Kevin, follow up?
Yeah, certain cities do have the right to enact their own city ordinance requiring background checks at gun shows. So would you be in favor of that or not?
Look, I think the Second Amendment rights apply both in rural areas and in urban areas, and I feel strongly about that. And it's one of the reasons that I was one of the lead supporters of the Heller document that would have taken guns away from folks in urban America. Look, guns are a tool. They're an instrument. They need to be used properly. In the hands of law-abiding citizens, I don't have any worries. Just to keep them out of the hands of criminals.
Mr. Breckenridge, 30 seconds.
Well, as the only person up here with a concealed carry permit, I think that the Second Amendment is very strong. I don't know about the cows you've shot out on your farm, but I know you have cut a few fat hogs in Washington, Senator Tester. But I might reflect back just a little bit to a bill you voted for cloture in 2012, where it would have made me a felon to hand over a rifle to my grandson without doing a background check and filling out the paperwork. That's a tradition that I have in my family. Is every time a grandchild is born, I buy him a firearm and I write a message to the future on that box.
Mr. Rosendale, you have 30 seconds.
It's very easy for John to stand here and say that he supports the Second Amendment, but it all is very hollow when he's willing to confirm a Supreme Court nominee, Sotomayor, who came out and said that the right to own a gun is not a fundamental right. So he let somebody else do his bidding. He can say that he's going to stand for the Second Amendment, but when he confirms a Supreme Court justice that says that they're willing to take your Second Amendment rights away, it is not acceptable to me. And that's why I've got an A and an endorsement for the NRA, and John has a D.
Senator Tester, you have the final word here.
Well, I would just like to say that I have opposed bills that require background check from parents to their kids. That's the record, and that's a fact. I would also tell you that going forward, I support the Second Amendment. I was raised with a gun. We shot vermins with a gun. It's critically important to me. It's critically important being a Montanan, raised here my entire life, that I was introduced to guns early, and I still use them today. As they've said, I've got more guns than I need, but fewer than I want.
Our next question from Tim McGonigal to Mr. Breckenridge.
Mr. Breckenridge, regarding immigration, what is your position on sanctuary cities?
Sanctuary cities, Tim, are a problem that the cities and the states have brought upon themselves. Constitutionally, those security of our border has been given over to the federal government, not to the state, not to a city. It's up to the federal government to ensure that we have an adequate immigration policy that meets the needs of the American, not only culture, but also the American workforce. And the immigration policy that we have right now is, what, 50 years old. Goes back to 1965. We've had a few amendments to it, but it's basically a 50-year-old policy that no one seems to want to enforce or seems to want to enact, to bring in people who will contribute to our society and to contribute to our culture. I would like to see an immigration policy similar to Switzerland, where the people in the town actually, you know, we have resident aliens. We need to fast track that. How come it takes you 5 years to come in the front door, but it only takes you 5 minutes to come in the back door? We need to change that.
Mr. Rosendale.
Sanctuary cities are a major problem, and this again goes directly to the heart of John's inability to support the president's agenda to secure our border and to stop sanctuary cities and to also stop the amnesty. He continues to vote with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and it drives up the cost for government here across our nation. When we start having this flow of illegal drugs and human trafficking taking place, and we have cities that are willing to open up their doors and allow these folks to have a safe haven, it's not acceptable. That's not the rule of law.
Senator Tester, your response.
Well, I've heard Commissioner Rosendale bring up Chuck Schumer a couple times now. My point to you, Commissioner, is if you love Chuck Schumer, you ought to move back to your home state, drive up the road a few miles, and run against him. Look, there are no sanctuary cities in Montana. The sanctuary city bills that were put forth cut money from law enforcement and economic development. Bottom line is that I'm not going to do that. I've been around, I've talked to the towns and the police departments in this state. They need every dime they can get their hands upon. On the other side of the coin, you've got Commissioner Rosendale, who has voted against money for law enforcement as a legislator, voted against not expanding penalties on people who are human traffickers. So I understand why it's not a priority for him. I'm talking local law enforcement. It is a priority for me.
Mr. Breckenridge, final word on this question.
Well, you've seen both of these guys beat each other up over a policy that none of us really have a grasp on. I think that that what we need to do is sit down and have a discussion that is going to be mutually beneficial for all of us, because this type of accelerant, once again, is only flaming the fans and putting us against them. And we're going to see more incivility. We're going to see more violence on this issue when it's totally unnecessary.
Kevin Stanfield, your next question goes to Mr. Rosendale.
All right, Mr. Rosendale, let's talk about the wall on the southern border of this country. You've gone out of your way numerous times to say that you support the president in his policies. So, when it comes to the wall, there have been a lot of designs, none of which seem to work. And then how are we going to pay for the wall? Your thoughts on that?
So I appreciate that question, Kevin. And what we have to do is understand that the contractors are the ones that are best suited to develop the system that should be put down there. And we've got several proposals, and I certainly believe that one of those can already be selected. And construction of the wall has begun. And when we start talking about cost, what's the cost to our nation with the illegal drugs that are coming through? We talk about the opioid crisis. We talk about the methamphetamine crisis. The fact of the matter is, the bulk of that is coming through our southern border. When we talk about human trafficking coming in, that's not just a financial and social issue and problem on our southern borders. That's a problem throughout the entire nation. And John refuses to recognize it. As far as addressing human trafficking, when I was in the legislature, I passed legislation that imposed the toughest penalties for children of human trafficking that were involved in human trafficking, 100-year penalties. So he's just, again, trying to distort the truth.
Senator Tester, your rebuttal.
Well, the record is in the state legislative history, and the fact is that Matt Rosendale voted against. He voted against increasing penalties for trafficking. That's a fact. As far as the wall goes, I'll tell you, one of the reasons the Customs and Border Protection folks have endorsed me is because they understand that I understand the needs in the wall on the southern border. We need to have a southern border that is rock solid secure, which means it would include three things. It would include a wall where appropriate. It would include technology, because we can do that for pennies on the dollar for what you cost to build a wall. And it would be manpower. In particular in the ports where drugs are coming across the line and in trucks and cars, we need more technology and we need more manpower, but we also need it on the border.
Mr. Breckenridge, you have the final comment.
Well, as a surveyor, you forgot one thing, John. Where are we going to put it? You're going to put it right on the border? You're going to survey that in? You know what happened down in Texas is that they had they cut off a golf course, and they made a zone that was just like the wall when I was in Germany. Between East Germany and West Germany, there's a 1K zone in there that was no man's land. And there's no economic, you cut off houses, you cut off family, you cut off people. John, where are you going to put it?
Well, it has to be willing buyer, willing seller, and if it's not, then they got a big problem. I believe strongly in private property rights, Rick.
Mr. Rosendale, you have the final word here.
I thought so. Thank you, Jay. Once again, this is a perfect example where John has been serving for 12 years and just hasn't been able to help solve the problem. He supported Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and open borders and amnesty. And John, I'm just afraid that you've been too wrong for too long.
We're more than halfway through our debate tonight. Let's turn it over now to Jackie Yamanaka. You have a question for Senator Tester.
Yes, Senator. Are you a free trader?
I think trade needs to be fair. And one of the problems we have right now with the tariffs situation is that we're paying the taxes both going out and coming in. I can tell you as a farmer that agriculture is usually the first to be hit. And we've seen it with the soy and sorghum. It'll be wheat next year. We've got to have trading partners. If we don't have those foreign markets that have taken generations to build, we're in big, big trouble. And I will tell you some other places, just about every walk of life. Insurance businesses have an impact because of the tariffs. Auto dealers are having potential impact. $6,000 on imported cars, $2,400 on domestically built cars. So we need to make sure that the tariff situation and what's going on with trade works not only for family farm agriculture but for business overall. And although I applaud the President's deal with Mexico and Canada, we don't have the particulars yet. And we've got to make sure that this is a deal that works for us. And that's why I support fair trade.
Jackie, follow up.
Yes. So you voted in the past against trade agreements.
Yep.
You have been a critic,
Yep.
as you said, of NAFTA.
Yes.
And you did mention the president's tariffs. So I guess I need clarification. Do you support President Donald Trump's position on trade and the tariffs?
Look, China's a bad actor, and I support the president's position on China. They manipulate currency, they steal technology, but we can't do it alone. We've got to bring our allies in to do it. What's happened with these tariffs is we've alienated Mexico, Canada, the EU, the Pacific Rim, and that's not the direction we should go. We should build our relationships with those allies so we can continue to do business with those countries, because it's critically important for our economy while we hold China accountable and hold their feet to the fire and do things like we talked about earlier, putting sanctions on them, particularly monetary sanctions.
Mr. Breckenridge, your rebuttal.
Sanctions are a very poor use of our friendship and partnerships with people abroad. What sanctions do is they pick winners and losers. And so what's happened here is that some people in the steel industry have come and said, rah, 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 let's get some sanctions on Chinese steel because we can't compete, because we got EPA laws, we got state, local, environmental rules that we can't comply with, which has made us uncompetitive, non-competitive. And so we got to change things locally here and not use tariffs as a whipping boy.
Mr. Rosendale.
I do appreciate this question, and I will tell you that President Trump had said for many years that we were in a very, very poor trading place, and it's been demonstrated because of the imbalance in our trade. And I am really pleased to see that after all of the naysayers, the president did bring Mexico to the table. He did bring Canada to the table. He stood there and said that if it was up to him, he would have zero tariffs and zero subsidies. But right now, he's working extremely hard and has brought those folks to the table, including the EU and China, so we can begin having some real trade agreements.
Senator Tester?
Yeah, well, one of the problems with tariffs and one of the problems with trade wars is that farmers always lose. And I will tell you that what we saw with Mexico was them signing the first trade agreement ever with Argentina. They're going to be doing business with Argentina until Argentina screws up. We have been generations getting these markets. You cannot fritter them away. If you do, it will have impacts, serious impacts on Montana's economy, because agriculture is our #1 industry. And so we've got to be very careful. As we hold China's feet to the fire, we've got to make sure that we don't push our friends away and our traditional markets away, which I believe is what's happened here.
Kevin Stanfield has our next question to Mr. Breckenridge.
All right, let's talk about an issue that's hitting close for Montana hunters and environmentalists. Can you give me your thoughts on the Endangered Species Act?
Endangered Species Act. We've taken a little bit too far. We've tied up lands now for mineral extraction in the name of endangered species. We've sent people to prison for accidental encounters that has led into a violation of that law. There was a guy who spent 5 years because he had an eagle feather. He's a Native American. He's 5 years in federal prison for an eagle feather. This thing has got to be changed, and it's got the crime has to fit the punishment. And so what's happened, we've used the environmental laws as the window dressing for suppression of the activities, the logging, the mining, those resource extraction industries that our economy so vitally needs. And they shut down, they use the Endangered Species Act to shut down every timber sale on federal land. Now we suffer through forest fires all season long and the health effects that come with it. Senator Tester seems to like those because he raises about $1 for every acre we have on fire in Montana.
Mr. Rosendale, you have 30 seconds.
The Endangered Species Act was well-intentioned, like many things are, and it was put in 1973, and we have gone far beyond the intent of that legislation. It was supposed to protect species that were either at threat to go extinct. And now we have broadened it to include all types of habitat, and Rick hit the nail on the head. Now we've got the logging industry that has suffered dramatically because of it, and I will tell you, it is dramatically damaging our agricultural industry as well, and we better watch out. We're going to turn off the water and stop every industry in our state.
Senator Tester.
The Endangered Species Act, when it was put into effect for a very, very good reason, and I think we can have both economic development, tree cuts, mining, and we can save the species that are endangered, but you have to walk the line. And when species get recovered, like wolves were a few years ago, I stepped up and said, let's take them off the list, and we did it. And wolves were no longer on the endangered species list here in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. So it's incredibly important that we use common sense as we apply this. And if it's used as an obstructionist method, we need to say no. It should be used for the intent that it was originally put in saving species that are endangered.
Mr. Breckenridge, final word.
We shouldn't have even had the discussion on wolves until they reintroduced them and said, oh, here's an endangered species. And they went and introduced them into our environment and then shut down everything. So that's the problem you have with the federal government intervention into states' issues and states' rights, is they come in there and they put their big thumb on top of it and they destroy the underlying economy. We used to have 39 mills from Eureka all the way down to Darby. Now we got 3 because of that Endangered Species Act is a big reason for those closures. And we're not going to get those industries back.
Jackie Yamanaka has the next question for Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale.
Yes, Jackie.
Please explain why Montanans are better off financially under the Trump tax cuts.
Oh, that's simple math, Jackie. I love this question. So I've been traveling around the state for the last 30 days and meeting with businesses and individuals across the state. The individuals are getting anywhere in the neighborhood of about $1,600 more that they're able to keep each year. The businesses are expanding dramatically. I went to an electrical contractor in Missoula who acquired a new firm and is bringing 10 more full-time employees on. I went to Aqua Creek Products, which is a company in Missoula that manufactures special seating devices to allow folks that are handicapped to enter into a hot tub or a swimming pool, and he is going to invest $700,000 to $800,000 next year into his firm as a direct result of this tax cut legislation. And I visited an aviation firm in Billings that awarded $800 to $1,000 bonuses to every employee in their firm and has increased the compensation. That is the kind of success that President Trump has brought.
Follow up, Jackie.
But how do you explain to Montanans who are paying about $3 for a gallon of gas, even more for diesel? Child care costs are up, interest rates are up, costs of goods are up for those manufacturers you talked about because of the tariffs. Why are they better off financially now?
Well, again, Jackie, the math shows it. Costs do go up and they do go down. And what we have to do is rely on the principles of supply and demand, free market principles, to actually govern those and not have the government coming in and picking the winners and losers and making determinations about where the marketplace should be. When I was living, when we saw the Bakken oil boom take place, I saw the minimum wage jump from $10 an hour to $17.50 an hour in Sidney, Montana, and the government didn't have anything to do with it. It was just simple supply and demand.
Senator Tester.
Well, thanks for the question, Jackie. I will tell you that I think Montanans appreciate the tax break. Where I see the problem is that it added $2 trillion onto our nation's debt. We're having a short-term game for a long-term problem, and that's a problem. And I think that we could do better. I think if the bill would have went through the process of the committee, we could have got public input, and we could have made the bill a much better bill. We do need tax reform. This bill was not tax reform. And I will tell you, in that regard, I've supported a balanced budget and pushed for a balanced budget since I got there. We haven't been able to get it across the finish line. I voted against 3 out of 5 of Obama's last budgets because I thought they spent too much money. And I've turned $3.3 million back to the Treasury from my office. So we can do some things to cut the deficit down, but adding $2 trillion at the strike of a pen at our kids' expense is not the direction to go.
Reminder, 30 seconds for those rebuttals.
Sorry, Jay.
Mr. Breckenridge.
Yeah, what we've seen is a jump from the 8 years of the Obama administration of 2% GDP to 4.5. This is right at the heart and soul of every libertarian. You get rid of taxes. If we got rid of the personal income tax and brought government spending into its constitutional confines, we would have GDPs in the 8 and 9% every year. But we have only 36 delegated powers, but yet we got a Department of Education. What's the federal government doing in education? We got troops over in wars, 15 years wars. We cut those out, folks. We're going to have a great economy, and Montana's going to benefit.
Mr. Rosendale, a final word on this question.
Final word is that the debt increase is being caused by the tax cuts is a false narrative. The tax cut legislation is going to generate more revenue than it's ever been generated for the federal government. The problem is spending, and the debt increase is a direct result of that spending. John talks about cutting spending. He increased the national debt 11 times, the debt ceiling, 11 times. He's increased the national debt from $8 trillion to $21 trillion. At the same time, I reduced my operating costs by 23%. What we have to do is focus on reducing spending.
Our next question from Tim McGonigal goes to Senator Tester.
Thanks, Jay. Senator Tester, what percentage of your staff are women? And if reelected, what will you do to increase the number of women and minorities on your staff?
Great question. Let me back up just a little bit here. By the way, the numbers I got for $2 trillion increase on the debt by the tax bill was by the conservative think tanks in Washington, D.C. that put those numbers out. It could be much higher than that. Look, I think it's about half, Jay, but I don't know. I mean, I hire people based on their ability, and I've got a lot of women on my staff. But I've never counted up and done the math, to be honest with you. When I go out and hire folks, like my state director is a woman right now, a lady from Anaconda, it's about how she can do her job and how she works and how she moves forward. And I can tell you that I've got some of the hardest working women on my staff around, and I can't appreciate the benefits that they give to my office as far as policy work and constituent work. They're the best of the best. And I'd say the same thing for the guys, by the way. We've got a great office. We're very proud of the constituent work we do. We're very proud of those folks having their ear to the ground to hear about how important things like healthcare costs are, public lands, public education, the list goes on.
Follow-up, Tim.
And a follow-up question. What would you do if a member of your staff were accused of sexual harassment?
I would hear them out, and if there was any merit to it, they'd be gone.
Mr. Breckenridge, you have 30 seconds.
I'm not quite sure how I can answer that, Tim, because I'm not in John's staff here. So,
but if you are elected,
oh, if I'm elected, okay. If I'm elected, when I'm elected, I think is a better way to put it. All right. So, you know, I had 3 businesses where we had 18 employees, and whenever I had a job opening, Tim, it was whoever best fit the job description that we had. Some of the jobs that I had, you know, running a chainsaw and cutting line were not a lot of jobs that women applied for. And so as a surveyor, there's a lot of good, intelligent women in our sector of society, and I have the utmost respect for every one of them.
Mr. Rosendale.
I've got about 50% of my staff that are women. My appointed staff that I'm actually have more control over. My chief legal counsel is a woman. My deputy auditor is a woman. My direct executive assistant, who takes care of a lot of my daily management, is a woman. And I hire these people based on their competency, and they're highly qualified, and their understanding of the insurance industry and their ability to help me perform my duties properly. And so I'm very proud of that fact.
Senator Tester, you have the final word.
Well, I just think that, you know, the fact is that we're talking about in Washington, D.C. about equal pay for equal work is ridiculous. We're in the 21st century. Women should be paid the same amount as men for the same work. I think that when we talk about problems in the workplace because of folks making improper remarks or actions towards women, I don't think we should have any tolerance for that. And when it comes to hiring, I think you open the door, and if you hire women, they'll do a great job for you. That's what I've found.
Jackie Yamanaka, next question to Mr. Breckenridge.
I'd like to go back to an answer you gave regarding spending and debt.
Okay.
Can you name 3 agencies or programs that you would eliminate right now?
Department of Education. That'd be the first one. Health and Human Services. There's no constitutional directive for the Health and Human Services. Those are states' issues, and they need to be at the state. They can handle them better. Third agency I'd cut would be the EPA. You know, in Montana, you have 67 different laws, rules, and regulations you have to comply with just to flush a toilet. And so Montana is very, very strong on their environment. The clean drinking water standards are 10 parts per million. Montana's 5 parts per million. So the EPA, get them out of the workforce, get them out of our economy, because they have no business dictating to states. I have a case I'm working on up in Basin, where a guy improved a road across Forest Service land because his claim was up just the next 100 feet up, and he spilt some dirt, and it went into what they said was a Rapanos decision stream, and he spent 18 months, 78 years old, 18 months in federal prison.
Mr. Rosendale.
Because of the EPA.
30 seconds to
Oh, we're
respond.
all getting that? Okay.
Yes.
EPA, education, and energy. Energy should be controlled by again, the principles of supply and demand, by the companies that are out there producing the energy. The only place that we should have energy involved in government is the Department of Defense to make sure that we have a secure nation. The EPA, Rick hit the nail right on the head. We have more stringent criteria here through the DEQ to manage our water and our air than the EPA has, and then do not need to be coming in and bothering the states and creating additional paperwork and process. And education definitely needs to be controlled at the local level.
Senator Tester.
Well, thanks for the question. Look, as you know, budgets are about priorities. That's what we did in the state legislature. We have a balanced budget amendment. And so instead of going agency by agency, I just kind of want to take a look at the programs. Trade, for example, there's probably 7 different departments and 2 different agencies, and maybe even more than that, that deal with trade. And I think that can be consolidated into one thing. You know, instead of being split between Commerce and USDA, for example, put it all in Commerce. And I think it makes things more accountable. What I would do if I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee is I would make it a contest. Take a look at the programs, not the agencies. Look at the programs, because I think that's realistically what you can cut that aren't working anymore, and propose them for elimination.
Mr. Breckenridge, you have the final 30 seconds on this question.
Well, looking at programs is like putting a Band-Aid on a carotid artery that's severed. All we're looking at, you know, John, when he ran 12 years ago, he says it's time to make Washington look a little bit more like Montana. But what's happened now, especially like with this answer, he kind of likes what's happening in Washington. And I think John's starting to look more like Washington than he does Montana, because of the effects of these agencies on the people here in Montana, and what they've caused, the pain and suffering that they've caused to not only the economy but individual incarcerations is not called for. We can't have it.
We knew our time would be going fast, and indeed it has. It's time now for our candidate closing statements. Each candidate gets a minute and a half for their closing comments. And again, the order that we're going in, determined earlier at random. Rick Breckenridge, you get the first shot.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you take a look at what this country has happened to it, we have $22 trillion of debt. You have 22 trillion reasons to vote Libertarian this year. What I'm here to do is to give you the courage and the strength to actually act out that conviction. I know every one of you have a point in the heart that says, I'm a liberty, I love freedom, I'm a libertarian. I want you to have the strength and courage to actually vote Libertarian this election cycle. Now, John Tester, he's up for re-election in the year of '18. He's voted twice to take your guns, repeal the second, that's his dream. He's millions of out-of-state money should make Montanans scream. But there's riders on the horse of liberty. They're waiting in the wings. It's time to ride. It's time to ride. We can shake things up in Washington with the voters on our side. Elect a Libertarian or we won't get out alive. It's time to ride, folks. It's time to ride. And I'm going to ask you, the voters of Montana, to ride with me to eliminate intrusive government, to eliminate these programs that cause economic hardship on our Montana families, that bring onerous regulations to the things that we hold near and dear to our hearts, our way that we raise our children, the way that we interact with each other. Politics in Washington is now divisive, where you have Democrats saying we are not going to be civil anymore, and we have to stop that. Vote Libertarian.
Senator Tester, your turn for the closing statement.
Well, I want to thank MTN and Yellowstone Public Radio. I want to thank you, Jay, and Tim, Jackie, Kevin. Thank you for running a very, very good debate. I think this was a good debate. I think you can see the differences here on stage. Look, folks in Montana have a choice this election. They can vote for somebody who is born here, lived here, educated here, ran businesses here, somebody who understands that healthcare costs are too high in rural America and what we need to do to drive those costs down, somebody who understands the value of public lands and how it contributes $7 billion to our economy, some 74,000 jobs, and also contributes to making this the greatest state and the greatest country in the world. We can support somebody who understands that public education is the foundation of our democracy, and we need to work to make it better, not work to privatize it. somebody who understands that transparency in government is critically important. If we're going to make good decisions, people need to be able to have access to that decision-making process. Or on the other hand, you can support somebody who was born in Maryland, made millions of dollars there developing property, bought a ranch in Montana, claims to be a rancher but has no cows. Somebody who has advocated for selling our public lands, advocated for kicking people with pre-existing conditions off of insurance, advocated for making sure that the transparency in our elections is minimal. He's not in it for Montana, he's in it for himself. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Mr. Rosendale, as luck would have it, you have the final opportunity for your closing statement.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank MTN and Public Radio for putting this on, and I would like to thank my wife, Jean. 33 years we've been married, and she's always there with me. Greatly appreciated. Folks, John stood here 12 years ago and told you that he would not be encumbered by special interests, and now he's the #1 recipient of lobbyist contributions across the nation. John stood here 10 years ago and complained about reckless spending in Washington, D.C. He has since voted to raise the debt ceiling 11 times, and the national debt has grown from $8 trillion to over $21 trillion. The fact of the matter is that Jon Tester bought a home, $1 million home in Washington, D.C., and he left Montana in his rearview mirror. John has been too wrong for too long. This is a perfect reason why we should have term limits in place. I support them and have a pledge that if I am fortunate enough to be elected as United States Senator, that I would only serve 12 years and then go back to my ranch by Glendive, where I love very much. You know, we've got a lot of big problems here, and they're not going to be solved very easily. And we need someone who's willing to go up there and make those tough decisions. You elected me to reduce spending, to reduce regulations, to protect your property rights and your gun rights and the sanctity of life, and I showed you that I would do so. I serve the way that I campaign. So now I would humbly ask for your support in the upcoming election, and may God bless each and every one of you and these wonderful United States.
And that concludes tonight's debate here on the Montana Television Network and Yellowstone Public Radio. Of course, the biggest reminder of all, Election Day coming up November 6th, and we would encourage everyone, please, to get out and exercise your right to vote. A thank you to all our 3 candidates. We knew the challenging schedule was going to be a hurdle, but we did persevere, and we thank you for all for being so flexible.
Thank you so much.
And a special thank you to the thousands of viewers on the Montana Television Network joining us here tonight to learn more about the candidates for the U.S. Senate. Thank you again for watching, and good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.